She was shivering alone in the cold, a tiny girl begging for medicine she didn't even understand. But the moment a Marine knelt beside her, everything changed. His canine sensed something no one else could, the faint smell of rope, fear, and a van watching from the shadows. What began as a simple act of kindness became the start of a rescue mission that would expose a nightmare hidden in plain sight, and a miracle no one expected. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, hit subscribe so you never miss another tale of courage, faith, and miracles. A cold winter evening settled over the quiet town, snow drifting beneath dim parking lot lights. The wind cut sharply across the nearly empty lot as Sergeant Ryan Mercer stepped out of the grocery store, a paper bag in one hand and a faint ache in his shoulders that always arrived when the weather dropped too quickly. At 36, Ryan carried the square, disciplined frame of a former U.S. Marine, broad shoulders beneath a worn olive-green jacket, a jawline hardened by conflict, and dark stubble across a face that rarely showed more than a calm, controlled expression. His short black hair was flecked with melting snow. Years of deployment had carved patience into him, but also left the quiet heaviness of someone who had seen too many things he could never unsee. His breath formed pale clouds as he stepped forward, his boots crunching into the thin layer of frost. Walking at his side was Ranger, his 5-year-old German shepherd with rich amber fur, alert brown eyes, and the powerful, precise gait of a former canine military dog. Ranger moved with disciplined awareness, ears twitching at each sound. He had been Ryan's partner since the day they left service together, both scarred, one in the body, one in the soul, but unshakably loyal to each other. Ryan had only intended to grab dinner on his way home to the small rental cabin he lived in near the edge of town, but the moment he stepped off the curb, he saw her. A tiny girl, no more than 7, crouched beside the sliding doors of the supermarket. She was painfully thin, so slight he feared the wind might lift her. Her small frame was wrapped in a faded pink jacket, far too thin for the cold, her messy strawberry brown hair sticking to her cheeks, her pale skin raw from the winter air. The girl held an empty plastic bag to her chest as if it were a lifeline. When she looked up, her large gray-blue eyes shimmered with fear, and something older than fear. Resignation. As if this was not the first time she had been left alone in the dark. Ranger slowed, his head tilted, his ears standing rigid. Ryan's voice softened as he approached the girl. "Hey there. Are you all right?" She swallowed hard before speaking, her voice trembling. Could you help me buy medicine for my mom?" She lifted the empty bag a little, as if needing to prove her purpose. "She's really sick. I just need $5. Please, I need to hurry." Ryan crouched, keeping his hands visible. Up close, she looked even more fragile, like a child who had learned to be afraid of being noticed. Behind that fear, Ryan caught something else, calculation, like she was trying to say the words exactly as she'd been told. Years of reading faces, enemy, ally, civilian, told him something about this didn't fit. A child who genuinely needed help didn't flinch every time a car rolled past. She didn't keep glancing over her shoulder like shadowy eyes were tracking her. Ranger moved closer and sniffed gently at the girl's sleeve. Then his posture snapped rigid, tail stiff, a low, warning growl vibrating through his chest. "Easy, boy," Ryan murmured, but he knew Ranger's instincts were never wrong. The dog was picking up something he couldn't yet see. He gently took the girl's wrist to steady her trembling hand. The moment his fingers brushed her skin, he froze. Thin, reddish grooves circled her small wrist, marks that looked disturbingly like someone had bound her with rope or zip ties. Worse, there was a faint, unnatural chemical scent on her skin, something sharp and industrial. Not medicine, not anything a child should smell like. "What's your name?" Ryan asked quietly. She hesitated before whispering, Sarah Whitlock." Her voice carried a softness that hinted at kindness, but also the careful restraint of a child who had learned to stay silent to survive. Ranger suddenly swung his head toward the dark section of the parking lot, his ears pinned forward, and a deeper growl rumbled from his chest. Ryan followed the dog's gaze. At first he saw nothing but shadows and a row of abandoned shopping carts. Then, Tucked behind them near the far exit, he spotted the faint outline of a gray van with its engine shut off and headlights dark. Someone sat in the driver's seat, still, watching. Ryan felt the old Marine instincts awaken, the silent tension that whispered danger was close. "Sarah," he said gently, "is someone waiting for you?" Her lower lip trembled. She didn't answer. Instead, she darted another terrified glance toward the gray van. Ryan's heartbeat tightened. He softened his tone even more. "Hey, you're safe right now. You can tell me." Her voice cracked. If I don't bring money, they get mad." "Who's they?" She shook her head violently. "They said not to talk. They said they'll hurt us." "Us, not me. Us." Ranger stepped closer, nuzzling Sarah's arm with unexpected gentleness. Something about the child pulled a fierce protectiveness from the dog. Sarah looked down at him with wide eyes, as if realizing for the first time something, might defend her. Ryan swallowed the surge of anger rising in his chest. He had seen exploitation before, in war zones, refugee camps, cities torn apart, but seeing it here, in his quiet town, wrapped in the shivering body of a child, ignited something deep and dangerous inside him. "Sarah," he said softly but firmly, "did someone tell you to ask strangers for money?" She stared at him, trembling. Then her face crumpled. "Yes," she whispered. "Please don't tell them I said anything. They're watching. They always watch." At that exact moment, the gray van's parking lights flicked on for a split second, as if signaling. Ranger snapped into a rigid stance, barking sharply at the van. Ryan's eyes locked onto the silhouette in the driver's seat. A stocky shape. A man. He recognized the look. Not of a parent checking on a child, but of a predator guarding stolen prey. He scooped Sarah into his arms. She gasped, stiff at first, then sagged against his shoulder when she realized he wasn't hurting her. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got you." But the moment he stepped toward his truck, the gray van roared to life. Headlights blazed. The engine revved. The van lurched forward, tires skidding on ice as it angled directly toward them. Ranger leapt in front of Ryan and Sarah, teeth bared, a protective snarl tearing through the cold air. Ryan spun sideways, shielding the girl with his body, slipping behind a concrete pillar as the van swerved past, close enough that he felt the blast of icy air from its speed. The van screeched to a stop 30 feet away. The driver, a heavy-set man with unkempt hair and a wild glare, later known to Ryan as Tommy Briggs, threw the vehicle into reverse. For a moment, Ryan thought he might try again, but then Tommy saw Ranger positioned like a soldier ready to charge. The van jerked, accelerated, and sped out of the lot, disappearing into the night. Ryan's pulse hammered. He held Sarah tighter. The girl buried her face against his chest, sobbing with fear and relief tangled together. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice broken. "They're going to come back." He looked down at her, then at Ranger, who stood protectively beside them, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the direction the van had fled. "No," Ryan said quietly, the old Marine steel settling into his voice. "Not tonight, and not ever again." He carried Sarah to his truck, opened the back door, and wrapped her in his spare jacket. Ranger climbed in beside her, lying close enough that she could feel his warmth. As Ryan shut the door and walked around to the driver's side, snow continued falling softly around them, like the quiet beginning of a storm that had only just begun. He started the engine, eyes narrowing at the dark road ahead. Somewhere out there, the van's driver was circling the streets, perhaps not alone. Somewhere out there were other children. "Us," Sarah had said, waiting for someone to come. Ryan shifted the truck into gear. He didn't know it yet, but this night would pull him into a world he thought he'd left behind, and it would begin with one simple, terrifying truth whispered by the girl beside Ranger. There are more of us. And as Ryan drove into the snow, he felt it, the sense that someone was watching them still. A cold wind dragged through the narrow town streets as night grew heavier. Ryan Mercer drove with slow precision through the dim back roads, his fingers tight around the steering wheel while his eyes swept every shifting shadow outside the windshield. The glow from the dashboard flickered across the sharp lines of his face, strong jaw, stubble darkening under the low light, brows drawn in a controlled expression he'd worn for most of his adult life. The memories of war had carved a certain stillness into him, the kind that reacted only when necessary, observing first, moving second, striking only as the last resort. But tonight, quiet observation felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Beside him, Ranger sat tall in the passenger seat. The 5-year-old German shepherd, trained through years of military canine service, carried himself like a soldier, ears forward, muscles firm under thick amber fur, breath steady. He wasn't restless, he was calculating, scanning. Every few seconds, he turned to check on Sarah in the back seat, then returned to watching the road. Sarah Whitlock, her tiny frame swallowed inside Ryan's olive jacket, huddled against the seatbelt. The girl looked even smaller now that she was sitting still, a frail 7-year-old with thin arms and pale skin that had the dullness of neglected warmth. Her messy strawberry-brown hair hung over her face, and when she lifted her eyes, their gray-blue depth held exhaustion, fear, and the instinctive awareness of someone who had learned to anticipate danger before it arrived. Ryan looked at her through the rearview mirror. "You warm enough back there?" Sarah nodded, though she didn't look warm at all. Her fingers curled into the jacket fabric like she feared it would disappear if she let go. I didn't know where to go," she whispered. "When he comes back and I don't bring anything, they shout." She paused, eyes glistening. "Sometimes worse." Ranger let out a soft, empathetic sound, shifting closer to the back seat. Sarah reached forward with a timid hand and brushed his fur. The connection seemed to steady her breathing. Ryan slowed the truck as they reached the back alley behind a hardware store, an area quiet and dark enough that Tommy Briggs would be unlikely to find them. He parked, shut off the engine, and turned back toward Sarah. "You're safe now. But I need to understand what happened before tonight. You said there were more kids." Sarah's lips trembled. 5. They stay in the house, in the woods." She swallowed. "They only let us out when we have to get money. If we don't bring enough, they—" She shook her head, unable to finish. Ryan lowered his voice. "And the house? What do you remember about it?" "There's a broken fence, and a big tree that looks like it's split in half, and a creek behind it." Her voice shook again, softer. "And they always park the van close to the back door on the child." Details sharpened Ryan's focus. As a Marine, he'd learned to reconstruct locations from fragments, tree shapes, sounds of water, man-made structures. He knew the north edge of town had pockets of forest and abandoned buildings. This house was real, and if he didn't find it soon, the children inside might not survive another night. He stepped out and lifted Sarah gently from the truck, placing her carefully on her feet. Ranger hopped down beside them, nose already working the air. Ryan crouched to meet Sarah's eyes. "Ranger's gonna follow the smell on your wrist, that chemical. They must have used it on all of you, right?" Sarah nodded. "They say it keeps us calm if we cry too much." The thought twisted something sharp in Ryan's chest. He took a steadying breath and signaled Ranger. "Track." Ranger inhaled deeply at Sarah's wrist, then lowered his head and moved toward the alley. His confident gait immediately shifted into a focused trot. Ryan guided Sarah to follow closely beside him. The alley was cold, dim, and quiet. Only the hum of a distant generator broke the silence. Ranger stopped near a dumpster, sniffing intensely at something hidden behind a sheet of wet tarp. Ryan knelt and pulled the tarp aside. A small, pink sweatshirt lay half buried beneath it, its fabric thin and patterned with faded butterflies. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. That's Ella's. She's 6. She sleeps by the door because they say she's the loudest." Ryan felt his jaw lock. He lifted the sweatshirt with care, folding it like something sacred. "We'll find her," he said firmly. "I promise." Ranger moved again, following the faint chemical scent. A few feet away, the dog pawed at a clump of icy slush. Ryan knelt and pulled free a small notebook scrap, smeared with dirt. One shaky word was written in a child's handwriting. "Ella." Sarah's voice cracked. "We leave notes sometimes, in case one of us gets lost, but they said no grown-up would ever find us." "They were wrong," Ryan answered. A sudden engine hum rumbled faintly in the distance. Sarah froze. "That's him, the van." Ranger's growl vibrated through the cold air. Ryan lifted Sarah into his arms and sprinted to the truck. Ranger jumped in behind them. The moment Ryan slid into the driver's seat, a dark vehicle passed the alley entrance slowly, too slowly, searching, watching. Ryan kept the truck in the shadows, waiting until the van turned a corner before pulling onto the main road. Sarah's whisper was tiny. "Are we going to get the others?" "Yes," Ryan said, no hesitation. Every one of them. The road grew narrower as they drove north. Sarah pointed toward a gravel path branching into the woods. That's where they drive. I remember the bumps. Ryan turned into the forest road. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Snow falling heavier, branches creaking in the wind. Ranger rose suddenly, paws against the dashboard. Ryan followed his gaze. Ahead, illuminated by a slant of moonlight, stood a massive tree with its trunk split cleanly in half. Sarah exhaled shakily. That's it. That's the tree. Ryan parked the truck and shut off the headlights. I need you to stay here with Ranger. I'll be close. Sarah's eyes widened with fear. Please don't leave me alone. Please. Ryan crouched, cupping her cheek gently. I promise I'll be back before you can count to 30. Ranger won't let anything touch you. The German shepherd licked Sarah's cheek, sealing the vow. Ryan stepped out, closing the door with quiet precision. The forest swallowed him as he moved deeper between the trees. Moonlight filtered through branches as he scanned the ground. A small blue glove, a crushed juice box, footprints, tiny, fading in the snow. His pulse quickened. Then he saw it. Between two skeletal pines, a faint yellow glow flickered from a broken window of an old shack. A sob, thin, trembling, drifted through the cold air. A child's sob. Ryan's heart hammered. The house was close. The children were inside. And someone else was there too, watching the forest like a predator in the dark. Snow pressed thick against the forest canopy as night settled into a suffocating stillness. Ryan moved through the trees with sharp, controlled steps, every sense trained on the faint light flickering ahead. The wooden cabin, if it could still be called that, sagged in the darkness like a wounded animal. Its warped boards leaned inward, its broken windows hollow and breathless. A faint glow pulsed behind the cracked shutters, too weak to be from electricity, too steady to be moonlight. Inside that glow, Ryan heard it again, a soft, trembling sniffle, the unmistakable sound of a frightened child trying not to cry. He crouched behind a fallen log and scanned the perimeter. The structure looked like it had been abandoned decades ago. Moss clung to the wood, and the back corner had collapsed inward. There was no sign of adults outside, no footprints except small ones scattered near the door, half filled with snow. That alone told him something important. Children had moved recently, but the adults were gone. Temporarily, not permanently. Ranger crouched next to him, nose twitching, amber fur bristling. Easy, Ryan whispered. We're going in quiet. Ranger lowered his head in acknowledgement, instantly adopting the silent posture of a trained canine preparing for breach. Ryan approached the unstable door, keeping low. The lock had been broken for so long it barely clung to the wood. He tested it lightly. Rotten, soft, ready to fall apart. Perfect. He took one breath, steady and controlled, then pushed the door inward with the quietest pressure he could manage. Inside, darkness hung like a living thing. The small lantern sitting on the far table flickered weakly, casting slices of light across the cramped room. Boxes were stacked along the corners, crates filled with torn blankets, stale food and clothing too small for any adult. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, unwashed skin and something sharper, fear that had soaked into the wood. Movement, a tiny gasp. Ryan held out his hand. It's okay, he said gently. I'm not here to hurt you. From behind an overturned cabinet, a small face peeked out, wide brown eyes, shaking shoulders. A little girl, no more than 6. Her dark hair fell tangled around her face, and she wore a thin dress printed with faded flowers. Her name, he knew from Sarah's trembling voice earlier, was Ella Monroe. Up close, she looked exactly like a child who had spent too many nights without warmth, frail limbs, hollow cheeks, skin pale beneath the grime. It's all right, Ryan whispered again. I'm here to take you home. Ella hesitated before stepping forward on bare feet, her breath shivering. Where's Sarah? She asked in a voice barely above a whisper. She's safe, Ryan said. I came because she told me you needed help. Ella's eyes flooded instantly, but before she could speak, 2 other figures emerged from the darkness behind her. The first was a boy, around 8, tall for his age but painfully thin. His light blonde hair fell over his forehead in uneven clumps, and his green eyes burned with guarded intelligence. Even in the dim room, Ryan recognized it, the spark of a child who had been forced to stay alert, forced to think beyond his age just to survive. This had to be Jonah Ellis, the one Sarah mentioned as the smart one. He stepped protectively in front of Ella and lifted a small piece of broken wood like a weapon. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice small but defiantly unafraid. Ryan didn't move. "My name is Ryan Mercer. I'm here to get you out." Jonah didn't lower the wood. "Where are the others?" he asked sharply, suspicion tightening his jaw. Ryan softened his tone. "We'll find them, but I need you to trust me for a few minutes." Jonah's eyes narrowed, assessing Ryan with a seriousness that no 8-year-old should possess. Then, slowly, very slowly, he dropped the wood fragment. Behind Jonah, another child stepped out from a makeshift pile of blankets. A little girl around 5 with straight black hair and soft features. Her dark brown eyes reflected confusion and quiet sorrow. This was Hannah Vo, the half-Vietnamese girl Sarah said often clung to a ragged teddy bear. The bear was clutched tightly in her small hands. Ranger stepped forward and sniffed the air gently. The children all jumped back. "He won't hurt you," Ryan assured them. "His name is Ranger." Ella stepped forward first, her shaking hand hovering before she touched the top of Ranger's head. Ranger closed his eyes softly, leaning into the small gesture. Hannah followed, pressing the worn teddy bear against Ranger's fur as if making an introduction. Jonah approached last, cautious but hopeful. Then, from outside, snow crunched. Ryan froze. The children froze. Ranger stiffened, ears high, posture ready to attack. The crunch of snow came again. He heard low voices, adult voices. Ryan motioned the children back. "Hide," he whispered, voice firm but quiet. "Now." Ella scrambled behind the cabinet. Hannah crawled beneath the table, hugging her bear. Jonah darted to the shadows near the broken wall, eyes burning with alertness. Ryan positioned himself by the doorway. Ranger crouched beside him, muscles coiled. A flashlight beam cut through the window. Heavy footsteps approached. 2 shadows, silhouettes long and sharp in the cold night. Ryan's pulse tightened. The men had returned sooner than expected. He glanced at Ranger. "On my lead." The door slammed open. A man stepped in, tall, heavy-set, wearing a dark coat that strained against his thick shoulders. His face was pitted, with a crooked nose and a patchy beard. Hard eyes scanned the room. He was not Tommy Briggs, but another member of the group. Unshaven, rough, and looking like a man who lived off intimidation. A second man followed, shorter, wiry, eyes darting nervously. 1 step. 2 steps. Ryan moved. He struck the larger man first, silent, quick, precise. The man grunted, stumbling backward into the doorframe. Ranger lunged at the second man, grabbing his arm with controlled force but not breaking skin, just enough to pull him down and pin him. Ella shrieked. Hannah covered her mouth. Jonah tensed like he wanted to help but didn't know how. The big man swung a fist at Ryan's jaw, but Ryan ducked, driving his shoulder into the man's ribcage. They crashed into the wall. The wiry man kicked at Ranger, but the dog dodged and re-engaged, snarling, forcing the man down again. Outside, a third voice barked orders. More footsteps. They were outnumbered. Ryan swept the larger man's leg, sending him crashing to the floor. Snow gusted through the open doorway. "Kids, move," Ryan ordered. Jonah grabbed Ella's hand and pulled her toward the back window. Hannah scrambled after them. Ranger held the shorter man down until Ryan shouted, "Ranger, with me!" The dog released and bolted toward the children, herding them out the back. Ryan blocked another attacker at the doorway, this one younger, with sunken eyes and a bruise along his chin. Without the hesitation Ryan expected, the man tried to rush inside, teeth clenched. Ryan didn't give him the chance. He grabbed the man's coat, yanked him forward, and shoved him into the heap of crates, buying precious seconds. "Run!" he shouted. The children burst into the snow outside, Ranger flanking them like a shield. Ryan lifted Hannah into his arms, Jonah steadying Ella as they slipped on the icy ground. They sprinted into the forest, the freezing air slicing their lungs. Behind them, men roared in frustration, voices growing more distant as they plunged deeper between the trees. Snow whipped past them, footsteps pounding against frozen earth. Finally, they paused under a cluster of dark pines, chests heaving. Jonah looked at Ryan, breath sharp. "Where are Caleb and Ruby?" he gasped. "They took them. They left with them earlier today, before you came." Ryan's stomach dropped. 2 children missing. And worse, likely moved somewhere more secure. The victory of saving 3 suddenly felt painfully incomplete. Ryan stared into the darkness of the forest, where distant lights flickered like hungry eyes. The rescue was far from over. Snow clouds pressed low over the outskirts as the night deepened into a heavy, suffocating cold. Ryan Mercer pushed deeper into the forest with 3 exhausted children huddled around him. Ella Monroe clung to his coat with trembling fingers. Hannah Vo held her frayed teddy bear tightly against her chest, and Jonah Ellis, always trying too hard to appear brave, walked close behind Ryan with determined but frantic steps. Behind them, Ranger moved like a silent guardian, ears alert, eyes scanning, paws crunching through the thin crust of snow. The forest's shadows swallowed their footsteps, but Ryan's focus was sharp. Every sense told him they were not safe yet. The men who had chased them would regroup. They would search the cabin. They would find the tracks in the snow, and they would come. For the children, for revenge, for control. He stopped beside an old tree stump and crouched so he could steady Ella's fragile shoulders. "You 3 did well," he said quietly. "We need to keep moving until we reach the truck." Jonah swallowed. "What if they find us?" "They won't," Ryan said, though uncertainty pressed like ice against his ribs. "Not if we stay quiet and follow Ranger." Ranger sniffed the air, then nudged Ryan's leg before moving forward with purpose. The dog wasn't tracking danger this time. He was following the faint chemical scent that lingered on Sarah earlier, and on the sweatshirt Ella had left behind, and on something else Ryan hadn't spoken of yet, a scent he recognized from years ago, from a military case that had ended badly, a case involving a man named Dylan Pratt. They reached the truck. Ryan lifted Ella and Hannah into the back seat, then urged Jonah to climb in. Ranger hopped onto the passenger side. As Ryan slammed the door, the wind carried a faint metallic smell, snow, gasoline, and something sour that made his instincts snap to attention. He drove quickly toward the town's northern edge, bypassing the police station. He couldn't risk involving officers who didn't know the situation yet. Instead, he pulled onto an abandoned service road leading toward the industrial outskirts. The cracked pavement wound between storage yards, rusted shipping containers, and old warehouses half swallowed by shadows. Sarah's earlier words echoed in his head. They always parked the van near the back door. There's a broken fence, a big building with no lights. And now Jonah's voice added new dread. Caleb and Ruby were taken before you came. Ryan slowed the truck near a chain-link fence that sagged inward. Beyond it stood a sprawling warehouse, gray metal walls, broken roof panels, windows blackened with grime. Rusted floodlights hung dead above the entrance. The building looked abandoned, but the tire tracks cutting through the snow were fresh. He felt something settle in his chest, anger, memory, and a sickening sense of recognition. Dylan Pratt had always used places like this. Ryan had encountered him 6 years ago during a military operation overseas. Dylan had been younger then, leaner, sharper, with a predatory smile and dead, glassy eyes. A trafficker disguised as a contractor, a man who escaped by disappearing into crowds, always one step ahead. Ryan remembered his face vividly. Angular cheekbones, hollow temples, blonde hair cut too neat for the chaos around him, and a jagged scar across his jaw, earned in some knife fight he had bragged about. Ryan had believed he was dead. He was wrong. Ranger growled low, his amber fur bristling as he stared at the warehouse. Ella whimpered. "I don't like this place." Jonah leaned forward. "This is where they took Caleb and Ruby. I remember the smell and the big doors." "Stay here," Ryan said. "Lock the doors. Do not open them unless it's me." Jonah's voice cracked. "You'll come back?" Ryan looked him straight in the eye. "I will." Ranger leapt out silently. Ryan followed, keeping low as they approached the broken fence. The cold wind whipped through, carrying faint echoes of movement inside the warehouse, shuffling, muffled voices, something metallic clattering against concrete. Ryan reached the side door and peeked through the rusted gap. Inside, harsh white light illuminated a narrow loading bay. A man knelt beside a crate, struggling with a thick padlock. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with tangled brown hair and a thick beard patching across his scarred cheeks. His clothes were grimy, a heavy jacket stained with oil, boots caked with mud. A visible smirk tugged his mouth downward, giving him a permanent scowl. His name was Tommy Briggs. Ryan recognized him now in the harsh light. The van driver, the man who had tried to run them down at the supermarket. Tommy muttered curses under his breath as he worked the lock, then kicked the crate when it jammed. Ranger tensed. Ryan lifted a hand to steady him. Suddenly, a second figure appeared from deeper in the warehouse. Dylan Pratt. He looked older now, but not weaker. His face was sharper, cheekbones pronounced, blonde hair slicked back in a calculated style. The scar across his jaw seemed deeper, colder. His pale blue eyes scanned the room with precise predatory calculation. He wore a dark coat fitting too neatly to be second-hand, a stark contrast to Tommy's filth. His presence radiated control, entitlement, and danger, and behind him, 2 children. Caleb Turner, 9, tall for his age with cropped brown hair and a bruise along his cheekbone, stood stiffly. Ruby Lane, 4, small and trembling, with curly red hair tangled around her tear-streaked face, clung to Caleb's sleeve. Their eyes were wide with terror. Ryan felt a sharp pain behind his sternum, a mix of rage and desperate resolve. He whispered, "Ranger, flank." The dog moved into position with the silent confidence of a trained soldier. Ryan stepped inside. Dylan turned instantly, eyes narrowing. "Well, look who we have here." Tommy Briggs spun, startled. "The hell? How'd he find—" Ryan moved before Tommy finished. He struck Tommy across the jaw, sending the large man stumbling into the crates. Tommy roared, lunging forward, but Ranger launched himself in a blur of amber fur and snarling teeth, clamping onto Tommy's forearm. The man screamed, dropping to his knees as Ranger pinned him with controlled, trained force. Dylan stepped backward, pulling Caleb and Ruby with him, but Ryan followed, his voice low and lethal. "Let them go," Dylan smirked. "You always were the righteous type, even back then." His grip tightened around Ruby's arm, making the little girl whimper. "Walk away, Mercer. You don't want to make this uglier." "You already made it ugly," Ryan said. "I'm ending it." He lunged. Dylan swung a metal wrench toward him, but Ryan dodged, tackling him hard against the wall. Caleb fell free and scrambled toward a stack of pallets, shielding Ruby with his body. Dylan snarled, swinging again. Ryan blocked the strike, elbowed him in the ribs, then slammed him against the concrete until the wrench clattered from his hand. Behind them, Tommy Briggs tried to crawl away, but Ranger growled, snapping his jaws an inch from Tommy's throat. The man froze, whimpering. Ryan pinned Dylan to the floor. Dylan gasped, furious, but powerless. "You think this stops anything?" he rasped. "There are more of us, everywhere." "Not tonight," Ryan said. A flashlight beam cut through the warehouse entrance. "Police, don't move!" Deputy Claire Dawson rushed inside, her boots crunching over debris, her dark blonde hair tied back sharply, eyes steeled with determination. At 34, Claire had the posture of someone who was tired of seeing the worst of people but refused to stop fighting it. She instantly took in the scene, crates, children, blood on the floor, and her jaw tightened like steel. "Mercer," she breathed, "you really did it." Ryan stepped back as Claire cuffed Dylan Pratt. 2 more officers entered and secured Tommy Briggs. Ruby ran to Ryan, grabbing his leg. "You came," she whispered. Ryan knelt, touching her hair gently. "I told you I would." Outside, the sirens finally stopped echoing. The ring had fallen. But Ryan knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. Dawn broke slowly over the quiet town, soft gold melting through the last traces of night frost. The hospital parking lot glimmered under the pale morning sun as Ryan Mercer stepped out of Deputy Claire Dawson's patrol car, the exhaustion in his body sinking deeper than the cold air that brushed against his skin. His jaw was bruised where Dylan Pratt's wrench had grazed him, and his left shoulder burned from the impact against the warehouse wall. But none of that mattered, not compared to the 6 small lives he'd pulled out of darkness. Ranger walked beside him with a tired but steady gait, his amber fur dull with warehouse dust, one ear slightly scraped. Even in fatigue, the 5-year-old German shepherd carried himself with the dignity and discipline of a veteran soldier. Nurses who passed by stopped to look at him, his powerful build, intelligent eyes, and the gentle way he turned toward the children's ward as if he already knew where he was needed. Inside, the hospital hallways hummed with the quiet bustle of early shift nurses. The fluorescent lights cast a soft glow over the polished floors. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, warm blankets, and something else, relief, tentative and fragile. Ryan paused at the doorway to the pediatric care unit. He could see them before stepping inside. Sarah Whitlock lay on the nearest bed, wrapped in a clean white blanket too large for her tiny frame. Her strawberry brown hair, now washed and combed, fell gently over her pale cheeks. A nurse, middle-aged, warm-eyed, with gentle hands, was finishing up a set of vitals. Sarah looked smaller, more fragile, but no longer hollow. She looked like a child allowed to rest for the first time. When she saw Ryan, her face lit up with a sudden, overwhelming mixture of joy and relief. She lifted her thin arms toward him, fingers trembling. "You came back," she whispered. I knew you would." Ryan crossed the room in 2 strides. He sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand carefully, mindful of the bruises still fading on her wrist. "I told you I'd keep you safe," he said softly. "All of you." Tears welled in her gray-blue eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength for a child so small. "I wasn't scared when they took the others. I knew you'd find them." Her trust hit him harder than any punch he'd taken that night. He swallowed the knot forming in his throat and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "You were very brave, Sarah." Ranger padded over and rested his head gently on the side of Sarah's bed. She let go of Ryan's hand only long enough to stroke the dog's fur. Ranger closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, breathing in her scent with the relief of someone who had counted every heartbeat of the night before. Across the room, Ella Monroe slept curled like a kitten in the warmth of a hospital blanket, dark lashes resting against her pale cheeks. Her small chest rose and fell steadily, no longer frantic like the terrified breaths she'd taken in the cabin. Hannah Vo sat on the bed beside her, clutching her repaired teddy bear, its torn seams sewn neatly by a night shift nurse with a kind smile and silver-streaked hair. Hannah's soft black hair gleamed under the morning light. Ruby Lane slept against Hannah's shoulder, her tiny red curls forming a halo as she breathed softly. Caleb Turner stood beside them, his lanky 9-year-old frame wrapped in a hospital gown too big for him. His face was patched with purple bruises, but he held himself upright, watching over the younger girls with the seriousness of a boy forced to grow up too quickly. When he saw Ryan watching, Caleb gave a small nod, silent, grateful, and proud. He might not have spoken much, but his eyes said everything. Jonah Ellis sat near the foot of Sarah's bed, drawing something with the markers a nurse had given him. His blonde hair fell over his forehead as he worked with quiet concentration, more relaxed now that the fear was gone. When he looked up at Ryan, his green eyes shone with a steadiness he hadn't shown before. "I drew Ranger," he said, holding up the picture. The drawing was rough, uneven, but full of heart. Ranger standing bravely in front of a cabin, protecting 6 tiny stick-figure children. Ryan felt warmth rise slowly in his chest. "That's perfect, Jonah." Deputy Claire Dawson stepped quietly into the room, holding a clipboard. Her dark blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, her uniform slightly disheveled from the long night. Claire was 34, sharp-eyed, with a calm strength that came from years of dealing with chaos. But right now, relief softened her features. "The kids are safe," she said. "The entire ring has been taken into custody. Dylan, Tommy, the other 2 men, they won't see the street again." Ryan nodded. "Good. You saved these children, Ryan." Claire's voice lowered. "If you hadn't gone after them yourself, we wouldn't have gotten there in time." He shook his head. "I didn't do it alone." Claire smiled down at Ranger. "No, you had the best partner in the state." Ranger let out a soft huff, almost like modest gratitude. Claire continued, "Child Services will arrive later today to arrange emergency care and temporary placement, but for now, they just need to rest. All 6 of them have been through hell." Ryan looked around the room again, taking in each small face, each miracle of survival. Sarah's trust, Ella's quiet resilience, Hannah's tenderness, Ruby's bravery, Jonah's intelligence, Caleb's fierce protectiveness, 6 children who had been swallowed by darkness and somehow found their way out. A slow, golden ray of morning sunlight spilled through the window and landed directly across Sarah's blanket, illuminating her small hands. She squeezed Ryan's fingers lightly. "It's warm," she whispered, as if surprised. "It's the sun," Ryan said softly. "It came back." Sarah looked up at him. "Because you saved us?" Ryan hesitated. He wasn't used to being seen as anything more than a man doing what needed to be done, not a hero. Not a savior, just someone refusing to turn away when it mattered. I didn't save you because it was my job, he said quietly. I saved you because no child deserves to be alone in the dark. The room fell into a quiet, peaceful stillness. Ranger curled beside the beds where Hannah, Ruby, and Ella slept, his body forming a warm barrier between them and the world. Jonah kept drawing. Caleb finally allowed himself to sit and rest. Claire placed a gentle hand on Ryan's shoulder. Go home, Ryan. Sleep. We'll take it from here. But Ryan shook his head. I'll stay a little longer. Claire nodded, understanding, not arguing. Ryan moved to stand by the window, looking out at the brightening sky. The town was still quiet. The roads were still covered in frost. But something had shifted. Something inside him he didn't recognize at first. For years he'd believed his purpose ended when he took off the uniform, that his usefulness had been spent on foreign soil, that whatever good he could do had already been done, leaving him with the shadows of memories he didn't want. But last night, those children, that fear, that battle, showed him the truth. Purpose didn't end with service. Sometimes purpose began again when you least expected it. Sarah tugged at his sleeve, her voice soft but certain. We're safe now, she said. Because of you. Ryan knelt beside her. Because of all of us, he corrected gently. Because you didn't give up. She smiled faintly, then drifted into sleep, her hand still curled in his. The sun rose quietly over the winter landscape, warm despite the cold, and in that moment, Ryan knew the darkness had finally broken for the children, for Ranger, and maybe for him too. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not storms parting or angels descending from the sky. Sometimes, a miracle is simply a moment when one person refuses to look away from someone who is suffering. A miracle is a Marine stopping in the cold to save a trembling child. A miracle is a dog who refuses to give up until every lost soul is found. And a miracle is you, anyone who chooses kindness when the world offers 1,000 reasons not to. May God remind us every day that light always finds a way into the darkest places, and that even the smallest act of love can save a life we never expected to touch. If this story moved you, please share it so more people can feel that hope. Comment to let me know your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue spreading stories that heal, inspire, and lift others toward God's grace. May the Lord bless you and protect everyone who listens, watches, or shares these stories.